Sina, just do me one favor. Don't ask Jihad too many questions today, please. Thank you. All right, here we go. We kicking off. Let's hear from our Sudanese humanitarians. Sina, here you go.
Thank you for the introduction. Eid Mubarak, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start off this conversation. As many of you guys know, we're coming on to 3 years of war in Sudan, and our homeland is still facing the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And just to sort of put things into perspective, I want to give you a quick run through of some of the numbers. Nearly 14 million people have been displaced from their homes, also making this the worst displacement crisis in the world. An estimated 150,000 people have been killed. And it's expected to be much more than that, but as you know, we don't have the most accurate figures coming out of Sudan right now. And at least 21 million people are facing high levels of acute food insecurity. Those numbers are so big, right? It's really hard to sort of wrap your mind around these figures, but the reality is, it's more than just numbers and data. Each one of those numbers represent real people, right? They represent our parents, our brothers, sisters, cousins, neighbors. And from the outside looking in, it feels like there's not much that we can do, everyday people, to sort of change the course of war, right? But what we have seen over the last few years is many people stepping in where lots of institutions have failed to do so. And that's sort of what leads us to this conversation today. I want to start off by quickly having you guys just introduce yourselves, if that's okay.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Eid Mubarak. My name is Jihad Saleh. I also go by Jihad Saleh. I am an artist, humanitarian, working in the international development space and on a board of directors for an organization called Sudanese Diaspora Network, which is a nonprofit organization based here in the US, but working in Sudan, and kind of a collective of professionals that have come together to bridge the gap between the diaspora and those in Sudan. So alhamdulillah, over the last 6-7 years, we've been fundraising for Sudan and doing different community events and bridging this gap and also creating this impact together.
Hi everyone, thank you guys for all showing up and thank you guys for hosting us and having us here. My name is Dua Muhammad, and head of strategic partnerships at the Mastercard Foundation, which is a large organization that focuses on work in Africa, focusing on financial inclusion, education, and workforce development. Very excited to be here, so thank you.
Hi everyone, it's good to see you all. Eid Mubarak. My name is Sana Ginawi. I am in healthcare strategy, transformation, and benefits design by day, but I'm also a multifaceted creative and community organizer. I'm one of the co-founders for Moving Forward Sudan, which was founded in 2013 actually, so it's been 13 years in the DMV, alhamdulillah, specifically in Virginia. Yeah, that's it.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Mu'min As-Sayyid. First of all, I want to thank everyone who had anything to do with coordinating all of this. Thank you all for having us. Thank you for creating the space for all of us to talk about this. This is important. I think these conversations are extremely important during these times. I'm not going to speak for the people of Sudan. Lakin, my heart goes out to everyone who lost anyone who is displaced or know a family member who is displaced. This is why we're doing this. This is why I'm here today. Currently, I'm an academic internal medicine physician at the University of Arizona. I also work with SAPA. I'm here to represent them officially. I've done a lot of work in academic medicine here in the United States, but also work pretty closely with SAPA and all the humanitarian needs and assistance that goes back home and even locally, actually. So I'm just glad to be here and thank you all for listening.
Mu'min, I actually want to start with you. Yeah. So when the war first started in Sudan, many international organizations evacuated their staff, right? So that left a huge gap in humanitarian and medical aid. But SAPA actually mobilized so quickly to sort of get help coming into Sudan. So can you just walk us through what those early days looked like for SAPA, and how did you guys manage to mobilize so quickly?
Yeah, there's a lot of NGOs and international organizations that left Sudan. Mainly, I think the reason is obviously security challenges. If you're not safe, you can't work. That was the mentality back then. But there were a lot of people who were already in the ground, and people who are just now willing to leave Sudan, right? SAPA was actually founded in 2019, so it's way before the war, and it was actually involved in the revolution, and things that they mainly focused on back then were the professional side, assisting the medical professionals, healthcare workers, trying to create sustainable education programs. We did a lot of workshops and outreach programs mainly. That's what we were involved in since 2019. Leading up to the revolution, we also supported the healthcare, delivery process, and even during COVID. So SAPA had already an established emergency response team in Sudan, and during the COVID pandemic, actually, we had oxygen stations, right? We had we created or worked with the logistical system in Sudan to deliver oxygen. We also helped actually provide residents for doctors, right, during quarantine, so that they don't go out in the community or infect people. And so it wasn't like SAPA was created from scratch during the war. It had already an established infrastructure, clearly not the same one that we have today for sure, but necessity is the mother of all invention. We had to repurpose our infrastructure by 2019, SAPA in Sudan had only 4 employees. Now we have like over 4,000. And we went from like a $12,000 organization to a $12 million organization. And we can't take the credit for all of that, definitely not. I think that 99% of the credit goes to the people in Sudan. They are just working in sometimes unsafe environments. They are putting themselves out there. They are committed. They see the light, and they are just passionate about what they do. So SAPA started reaching out to these people, right? Okay, so who's in Sudan? First thing was identifying the people who were in Sudan, from healthcare workers, from doctors, identifying the clinics that were still working, the hospitals that were still working. The first stages were just mainly collecting data and understanding what needs to be done. Then mobilizing people to these areas. Not only that, but also actually creating an opportunity to give people incentives. Like SAPA had given monetary incentives to people who were in Sudan to go work and to mobilize to areas with the highest IDPs. The main focus was internal displaced people, see the highest numbers, see if there's any working healthcare facility, funding that facility, making sure that we renovate it, making sure that it's at least at minimum function status to provide some type of healthcare. And one of the things that we focused on, and we still stand by today, is medical non-partisan, meaning that across the lines, a patient is a patient. We have to commit to treating people. And that meant most of the times people who had nothing to do with the war, but they happened to be across different lines. And this would have not been possible without the people in Sudan. They are so dedicated. They inspire me every single day and show me what is possible. I hope that answers the question.
Jihad, we also saw the Sudanese Diaspora Network also mobilize lots of communities around the world. Can you tell me what the strategy was like for you all, and how did you guys manage to mobilize so quickly too?
Yeah, so SDN started in 2019, around the same time SAPA, and we really came together, like I said, as a group of professionals across different sectors and industries around the world. Some of us were in the States, some of us were in the UK, some of us were in the Middle East. Honestly, during that 2018, 2019 revolution time, I feel like the Sudanese community got a lot closer via, social media, via connecting and just getting to know each other that way, and coming together to support Sudan. So we came together as this group of professionals in thinking, how can we take our skills and our own experiences and our exposure outside of Sudan to support the youth that were driving this change in Sudan, with the hopes of not only addressing the immediate, situation and the emergency assistance that was needed, food, water, medical assistance, and also advocating for Sudan, of course, but also the next stage of Sudan. What's the next chapter in terms of recovery? How can we help drive, knowledge? How can we help drive development ideas, connections, networks? So that was our vision in terms of supporting Sudan's recovery. We actually had a conference we did in Sudan, 2019, Fikata Sadaga, which was crazy because it was, that's such a significant, structure when it came to the previous regime. But the golden days, right? So we hosted a conference. We brought together so many grassroots organizations and youth, and people from different ministries within the government, and people from international INGOs, and just thinking around how we can build on some of the ideas that the youth were leading in different spaces, in tourism, in health, in education. And so that was the initial, vision we set out with. And in terms of community engagement, to answer your question, because we had this benefit of being in different places in the world, we set up events in different places around the world, and we're able to mobilize communities where we were. And that kind of, and these events were usually to inform people who were Sudanese and non-Sudanese about what's happening in Sudan. A lot of the youth organizations that were leading, or the youth that were leading the charge in Sudan in terms of this next chapter of development, who eventually became the grassroots organizations and first line responders on the ground, were the ones that we were highlighting and informing people about, so that they, we could advocate for them and their agency as well. And so I think for us as SDN, it's always been about how can we mobilize the diaspora to support those on the ground and those that are on the front lines of, addressing Sudan's challenges. Another way is obviously through social media. So we built, a big platform on socials and have been able to raise awareness about Sudan. And I think for me, what's been really impressive or exciting or, or inspiring for me is that there's so many non-Sudanese people that follow SDN and that ask us questions and that send us DMs and that tune into the town halls we do, whether it's in person or online. And I think, and they all have this motivation to support Sudan because they understand what's happening, they hear about it. And so they want to hear about it from us, and they want to know how they can better support. So that's all as what our vision is for SDN. We see it as a community thing, not just us, but we all own SDN. Yeah.
Definitely, and social media is a big part of that. I want to come back to that a little bit later. But Sana, I want to go to you. On a local level, can you tell us a little bit about moving Forward Sudan, how that has, is this working? Okay. And how that's evolved today to serve the Sudanese community?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, Moving Forward Sudan was founded in 2013, and it was actually during a time of personally observing incredible momentum in the youth in Khartoum specifically. At that time, 2011, 2012, it was the first time that TEDx Khartoum had landed. It was the first time that there was a stage like that available in Sudan where people were sharing ideas, innovation. There was also a lot of youth-led forums around mentorship, professional development, and it was really inspiring. It was really inspiring to see. And in looking around our community here, I was like, this is clearly a gap that we don't have. A lot of us who grew up in the DMV are obviously very familiar with the Jaliyas, which are a fundamental pillar of our communities, especially around holidays like Eid. So much love for the Jaliya. But also, I think there was a gap specifically for the youth. And being first generation, there's a lack of resources, there's a lack of knowledge. just navigating everyday life, especially transitioning into college and professional development. There was no real path, and it was a necessity to have a community to be able to lean on, to share resources and experiences. So moving forward was created during a time of inspiration, during a time of true hope in Khartoum, where I was like, wow, things are really changing and developing. And we were, initially started doing communal events around social gatherings, economic and information exchanges, a lot of panel discussions from folks who were professionals, whether it was in Congress and development, in international development space, but also partnering with local organizations that helped us facilitate whatever need that we had in the moment. We had, alhamdulillah, a very successful mentorship program, which was so key for the youth in this community and being able to ensure that they had some sort of direction for college and career and navigating that path. And then, of course, like being Sudani, I think it's innate in us to, we grow up and part of our culture is so communal and so rooted in helping one another and being there for one another and sharing during the good and bad times. And so naturally, during moments of crises, like we looked left and right to our local community. It's like, what can we do here and now to support the things that were happening in Sudan? And a lot of that just meant showing up, being able to, whether it was laugh and celebrate and enjoy an accomplishment that we had locally, or also just grieve and process what was happening to our families and back home in Khartoum. I think it was really important to create those spaces. And we have grown significantly, and it's been kind of, a roller coaster, and we are here to serve essentially the community needs of that moment in time, and so that it allows us to be agile, it allows us to be flexible, but it has also allowed our community to grow. Like obviously I see a lot of familiar faces here and people who have come and supported Moving Forward events, who have been a part of Moving Forward events. And I think in observing now what's happening in Sudan, it was really, really important for us to continue to amplify the work of the Sudani youth. And another part of our innate culture is our ability for storytelling, our ability to connect around art, around music. Obviously, Nile Nights is another kind of expression of that. But art and poetry and music is such a fundamental part of our culture. It's how we express ourselves. Someone said earlier that Sudani people are creatives. I truly and fully believe that. And so during this war, we're really focusing on uplifting displaced Sudani artists, different kinds of artists. So artists, oil painting, sculpture work, all sorts of artists that, this is their careers, this is their livelihoods. And I think art is often overlooked, and African art is often overlooked. And I think if we don't platform ourselves, then who's going to platform us? We have really stretched far and wide across different countries all over the world, trying to uplift Sudanese displaced artists, Nairobi and Egypt, across Europe, in different parts of the world, created exhibitions. We actually have one coming up in May, inshallah, where we're uplifting their work and showing their work and making sure that they're also paid appropriately, that they are in the appropriate spaces, so true art galleries in front of people who deserve to see their art, who can pay for their art, because Sudani artists also deserve to be paid, especially now. And so, yeah, I think a core value for us is continuing to be agile and continuing to transform for the needs of our community during the good and during the bad, and it's really important that we preserve as a youth our culture of communal living in good and in bad.
Dua, I want to bring you into the conversation now, just from a slightly different angle. So you work with one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations, for the Mastercard Foundation. For many of us who may not know how foundations like this operate, can you explain to us how your work intersects with crises like Sudan?
Thank you. Honestly, it's such a great question because it doesn't intersect with Sudan, unfortunately. A lot of these organizations, have the resources, they have the funding, access, and have potential to contribute to large development across the continent. But the problem is with a lot of the organizations is that it's very hard for them to respond to crisis or respond to emerging markets or respond to emerging conflicts. The Mastercard Foundation, they have a strategy that's focused on having 30 million youth in dignified and fulfilling work by 2030. So that strategy was created back in 2020. A lot of these strategies are 10-year strategies that are very kind of hard to kind of adapt to what's going on, to what's happening in the world. But in that strategy, of the 30 million dignified and fulfilling, of the 30 million youth, at least 2.5 have to be refugees and displaced young people. And so when I was trying to kind of bring the topic of conversation about Sudan, one thing I've learned is that when you're in these organizations, things don't move along unless there's someone internally pushing and bringing the conflict to light, or just sharing and influencing and advocating for it. And so when I noticed, before the war, when the strategy was coming to light, they were focusing on opening in 10 countries across the continent. And of the 10 countries, not one of them was Sudan. And one of the questions that I asked was, why? And a lot of the answers was like, oh, it's not stable, there's a lot of conflict, and there's a lot of negative connotation around when it comes to Sudan. So I was like, okay, no problem. And then the war came upon us, and knowing that there's at least a minimum of 2.5 million as focused on displaced and refugees and displaced young people, I took that as an opportunity to kind of create some sort of strategy to really help and support Sudan and then young people across the continent. I knew Sudan was a no-go because of what was going on, so we started to kind of look of how we can kind of support these refugees and displaced young people across the continent. Sana mentioned Nairobi, Egypt, and whatnot. And so a lot of times when organizations are large and whatnot, it's really hard for them to be able to respond. So you have to come with a solution. You come with facts and numbers. Really happy that Mu'min mentioned, you guys are now 12 million. Mashallah, that's amazing. So you take these numbers, share, and say, there's a lot going on the ground. But you really need to kind of just really show how that's happening and how really showing that impact. Because a lot of these organizations, when they think about impact, they think about how they can assign it to equity. So if they're going to be funding in Sudan, what are those numbers going to create? What kind of impact are they going to create? And so now it's kind of really just trying to bring that to light. It's really kind of just sharing what's going on the ground.
I'm really glad. I'm really glad you brought up that point that you have a seat at the table, and that's sort of how you brought Sudan into your work with Mastercard Foundation. But we have so many people who work in different fields in this room, and I'm sure lots of people are also wondering, how can we, in our respective fields and industries, pitch Sudan to our employers from a philanthropic standpoint to sort of help us out in a way that can also benefit them?
Thank you. I actually wrote step by step for those.
Okay.
And it applies across all sectors, to be honest. And I think it's really, really important, especially now. I think, social media and there are so many Sudanese across the continent. Things are coming to light. Nairobi now is the biggest hub for creatives for Sudanese artists. So people are really interested now. Is like, how can we support these displaced artists, and how can we bring money and whatnot? So one thing that I think that could apply for everybody, regardless of what sector you're in or profession you're in, I think the first thing you have to do is really start building trust. People are more likely to listen when they see you as credible, thoughtful, and solution-oriented. You can't come with a challenge unless you have a solution for them, because a lot of times these, leaders in their positions don't have the time to think of, how can we do this? If you come with like the pitch or the problem, and then you tie it along with how you can respond to it and how you can tackle it. And then bringing clarity to the challenge. So what's the opportunity and what's the role of the organization can play? That's really important. A lot of these organizations are really interested in how this can not only create impact, but how can they be the ones to be able to drive this to become a ripple effect across other organizations. So clarity is really important, and creating opportunity. Facts matter. As I mentioned, numbers, as much as money talks, numbers talk as well. That's really, really important when you're trying to frame the challenge. But also timing and relationships matter as much. I think it's really, really important. As you think about that, you need to start thinking about when is the right time to make that pitch, or when is the right time to bring that topic to the table. I've seen when you build trust and you bring evidence and a clear ask, whether it's like funding or creating awareness or whatnot, you move away from being someone who is raising concern to someone who's offering direction. A lot of times these organizations want direction and want support when it comes to that. Yeah, there's a lot of people that want to help, but they don't know. So I can give you an example for when the war first started breaking out. At the time, I was with our scholarship and education team. So one of the things I had to think about, like, how can I use my role to really support what's happening? Okay, so I know we provide scholarships. We work with 42 universities across the globe. Of the 42 universities that we work with, they each have their target, they have to have 25% young people who are displaced. 70% have to be women. So I would jump on calls with the 42 institutions and be like, how can I support you to reach your targets of the 25% young people displaced, and how can we support you to reach young women? And it's going back and forth. And I was like, the humanitarian, what's going on in Sudan is the biggest crisis in the world right now. Generations are losing opportunity and access to education. How could you be the first to really support that, and can you lead the way? A lot of times people are like, no, we don't want to take the risk. How are we going to bring them here? Visas, yada, yada, yada. A lot of excuses. The first university that was like, okay, we'll put our hand up, we'll try this. We'll put a minimum of 10% of our targets to be young Sudanese women. And that was Oxford University. And because Oxford University was a credible university and very much known, everybody else was like, you know what, if Oxford's doing it, we're going to do it too. So now all 42 universities have a minimum requirement of 10% young Sudanese women that they need to bring on into the university. So it's like, that was like, so that was like the opportunity and the framing. So I took that opportunity to kind of help them reach their goal, but at the same time, bring awareness to what's happening on the ground. So those are opportunities that you can do as well.
Okay, we don't have that much time, but I want to sort of quickly run through the next set of questions. Mu'min, I want to go to you. We've seen lots of international organizations pledge lots of money to Sudan, right? We see in the headlines, $30 million, $30 billion pledged to Sudan, but we haven't necessarily seen that translate on the ground. Can you explain to us what are some of the main reasons for that?
This is a very complicated question. It's multi-layered. There's so many different barriers that we have to overcome. To give you some context, I think based on the reports from the WHO and the UN, they have been identified about 2.6, if that's accurate, $2.6 billion to help support or fill the gap of humanitarian needs in Sudan right now. What's been done so far is about 140 million only. This is less than 5%. Of what's needed for humanitarian need and assistance in Sudan right now. We've seen a lot of pledges, like you said. It's very hard to, and I'm not trying to be the devil's advocate here, but it is a very complicated process to get that money into Sudan and translate into the ground. A lot of people prefer working with grassroots organizations because, quote unquote, we get the job done. But what that really translates into is the fact that grassroots organizations in general, including SAPA, we know a lot of people in Sudan, right? We have people on the ground. We have connects, whether it's family, whether it's friends, we have a connect. Someone who's not even aware where Sudan is geographically on the map does not have that. And it's very hard for them to just pledge a big number. And it's to echo what you said, right? The money is there. How do we bring it to Sudan is the biggest question. And like Dua said, it's like a lot of these foundations don't have, well, I don't want to say they don't have the time or the bandwidth, but it's very hard for them to start the process from scratch in Sudan. And that's where grassroots organizations kick in, right? Our role is much bigger than we think. And it's not like we chose it, but we're forced into it because now we are the connect, right? So for SAPA, for example, we didn't gain the trust of the WHO or the UN until 2025. That's almost 2 years after the war, right? But it's exactly what you said. It's once they gained trust, they saw what SAPA was doing. SAPA is rooted in transparency. All the numbers are posted online. What we do is posted online. The people there's a WhatsApp announcement group. Every single project is being posted online day by day, live. These are the people, these are the names, this is the money that's going on. So when, for example, I can't remember exactly which foundation, but they promised $30 million for assistance in Sudan, right? How do we get that over there, right? Okay, so first of all, the $30 million, you need to understand, it's not just, okay, here's a cash sum, $30 million, there you go, bye. No, it's a pledge over years. So $30 million is not gonna be all in 1 year. It's over a period of time that they choose. In order to get it to Sudan, there's, first of all, a lot of bureaucracy surrounding Sudan within international organizations. And of course, the thing that always comes up is the security, safety, and destabilization. But it's kind of, this is why they exist, right? You're trying to help people who are in crisis. So if you're saying that crisis is the problem, we can't help with crisis, sounds a little counterintuitive. But it comes down to, okay, the nitty gritty. There's $30 million now ready for Sudan. Who does it go through? Who do we give it to? There's a lot of fragility right now in the system in Sudan, especially in the healthcare system and all other systems, to be honest. How can we effectively provide that? Okay, they got the clearance for the $30 million. To get it across, then you still have permits from the government. You still have lines that are imaginary lines, but territorials within RSF, SAF. How are you going to get to that clinic? How are you going to get to this clinic? The process is very complicated, and in order to get to every single one, by the time the $30 million is in Sudan, it's probably a few thousand people too late, unfortunately. And that's how and why it seems like from the outside that it's not really translating. And in most cases it's not, but this is why I think grassroots organizations are so important. We all can help, not just healthcare, in all different industries. You can all help, right? One of the first things that, for example, I'll give you an example. This is my personal story, right? When I was in residency training and the war started, right? And it was a huge pivot in my personal life and my interests. I went and did the global health training, for example, which is a program offered by the CDC and the University of Minnesota and Mayo Clinic, and they teach about how to provide care in underserved areas, low resource areas. I didn't see myself doing that from the get-go, but with the war coming, I was like, okay, I need this. This is a responsibility. So I think everyone here, no matter what your industry is, there is, I think, in my opinion, an opportunity to switch gears, not completely change your career line or your interests, but at least give space for Sudan. I think there's a lot of hope. I personally, I am not a pessimistic person. I think the money will come. People need organizations that are credible, that are resilient, that are consistent and very transparent. The more and more we do it, the more I think the funding will come.
Jihad, I want to go to you for this one. You guys sort of all touched on this, but what would you say are some lessons that international organizations could take from our grassroots initiatives and ERRs and local initiatives that we've seen Sudanese communities come together to act so fast? What are some lessons that they can take?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Moomin touched on it really well, which is international organizations a lot of times don't understand the local context as much as people on the ground do, obviously. So there's always been this conversation about, I don't know if any of y'all, probably some of y'all have heard about the word localization. Localization is not a new concept that's been around for decades and decades and decades, since way back when, but they've always tried to integrate it into their programs. You know, it's about working with the people on the ground and the organizations that exist on the ground, the networks that exist on the ground, and trusting them with the work. And as much as it's been preached about in international development spaces and within INGOs and large institutions, it's not implemented in the way that it could be. You know, there's a lot of potential, especially in places like Sudan and across the African region, where you can trust the local organizations, the youth, the first line responders that understand the lay of the land, understand the security situation, they understand how to procure items for cheaper, or just to be, economies of scale, just to be more efficient and more effective. So I think a lot of international organizations, and Dara may attest to this, is they don't have the closeness to those that are of that country or of that community, to hear from them. Now I think they're starting to, and they're starting to listen. But these things have to be integrated into programming. So the bureaucracy is a big thing. The ERRs, Sina mentioned, ERRs are the emergency response rooms, who, I don't know if y'all have paid attention to that, but they recently got nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. And this is the ERRs, for those who don't know. I've come across a lot of people who didn't know they were even after, but they're a network of young volunteers across Sudan who are responding to what's happening in Sudan, the immediate needs of communities around Sudan. And so they've been the ones that have been that have been quick to respond and been able to get money quickly and turn it into, food items, turn it into trucks for water, turn it into cash, stipends for electricity or whatever it is, and just get that immediate assistance to families in need and individuals in need. And so trusting networks like that have shown that they can have an impact on the ground, I think is an important lesson for a lot of INGOs. And I think it requires the collective involvement of us, the community. Like I said, I think they need to understand that, and we have a lot of champions from within the space, as you can see, and others that are, championing these efforts to help change things within the institutional, frameworks of trusting Sudanese people, and us coming together to highlight what's happening in Sudan, and organizations being transparent about what's going on, and not just the problems, the challenges, but the impact too that a lot of these organizations are having on the ground is important, to Dara's point.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think international organizations can take many notes from how Sudan have handled this conflict. Sana, I want to go to you. Social media has played a big role, right? 2019, we had Blue for Sudan. We had Rihanna changing her profile picture to blue. Everyone knew about what was going on in Sudan. Unfortunately, we've seen that decline over the last few years, whether that may be fatigue, lots of causes there. But it's still rooted in everyone's initiatives, right? It's still rooted in our fundraisers. All of that is sort of backed by social media. How important would you say the role of social media is in our cause?
Yeah, I think social media has been fundamental in the Sudani revolution. Like you mentioned, we saw the internet transform before our eyes in 2019. I think there's two things with social media. It can be very shallow, right? Because it only means so much for someone to repost or to swipe through a post and understand the gravity of the situation. Very briefly, momentarily, exchange with that, but then it's also fleeting and it's gone, and maybe it's in the back of people's minds for an extended period of time. I think, our role as Sudani people who are directly impacted by the war, our families, our loved ones, not only is it our role to advocate for Sudan and for Sudani organizations and for Sudani people who are doing the work, the true work, thankless work, by the way, but it's also our roles to sustain it, right? Through storytelling, through art, through music, through uplifting one another, through creating work that actually maintains maintains energy and maintains people's focus and attention on Sudan. Because otherwise people are exchanging information about Sudan on a very shallow level. But that in some ways that's a good thing, because it also means that people are understanding the gravity of a situation that maybe they otherwise may not have, understood, or even come across Sudan or understood what's happening in the country, especially given, racism, a lot of inherent racism that we're seeing. Our causes really minimized. It's very hard to push the algorithm through a lot of information. Obviously, the world is in shambles right now, right? But the gravity of what's happening in Sudan is completely, undermined oftentimes. So I think social media is a tool that we use. We can access it to share, exchange information, to organize. But as Sudani people, it's really pivotal for us to take on an individual responsibility of how we use social media. Make sure that we're sharing information that is factual, right? That is beneficial, that's not propaganda, that's not spreading rumors or lies. But in addition to that, exchanging and work that allows us to sustain attention on Sudan in a positive way, in a meaningful way, through local initiatives, through fundraising and all these sorts of things. So we use it as a tool, but it's not everything to us. It's just allowed us to understand that advocacy does not just belong in institutions. There's individual power in the ways that we can advocate and uplift our causes.
All right, unfortunately, we have to wrap it up, but I want to go to each of you for one final question, or two. I want to ask you, if you could just say very concisely, what gives you hope, and what's one action step that we can all take away from today to help support the Sudanese community?
Okay, I'll start with myself because I have the mic. I am generally a delusional person and very hopeful. And actually, funny story with moving Forward Sudan, when I first had the idea of the very first event, I remember messaging the guy who started TEDx Khartoum, who was in Khartoum, to come to the event, which was in Virginia. There was no connection at all. And subhanAllah, he actually ended up coming and was able to speak to the work that was being done in Sudan, how transformative TEDx Khartoum has been, how transformative the youth forums have been in Sudan. And so I would say delusional is good, especially when it's rooted in optimism. Yeah, and like actual work, right? Work behind the delusion. I also think it's really important to get involved in your local organizations. And honestly, reading and paying attention to the news, but from the appropriate sources. Don't want to feed into propaganda. There's a lot of noise on the internet right now around the situation in Sudan. But I think it's really important to take on that individual responsibility and stay connected to your local organizations, be involved, meet the right people, volunteer your time, and really try to see where you can fit in with your experience. MashaAllah, we're all here very professional and accomplished individuals, and there's always space for you to provide your expertise and your in your specific career field. So yeah.
Beautifully said. I think in my perspective, there's a quote or a saying that I always think about. It's in Arabic, so I'm going to translate it. تحسب أنك جرم صغير وانطوى فيك العالم. You think you're little, but within you is the whole world. I think that's the potential that a lot of Sudanese people have, but haven't reached yet. I think creating the bridge between our diaspora and the locals is what gives me hope, and I see that with a lot of the organizations and the grassroots organizations, seeing what's possible with direct examples with SAPA, right? 4 employees in Sudan, $12,000 in the bank account, and now we're probably the biggest Sudanese NGO on the ground and probably internationally, and when it comes to humanitarian need. And it happened through repurposing what already existed, right? It's not like we created something from nothing. With a little bit of tweaking and taking into consideration that your environment, you can achieve so much. And we know we can do that if we put our hands together and organize well. And I think that's one thing I wish it can be a little bit better within our Sudanese community, especially creating that bridge. I think we can build more bridges between here and home. A lot of us are in positions that can actually help. A lot of us sometimes don't because we don't know how to, and there are some other reasons. Seeing more and more organizations taking up that role of laying the path for people to actually get involved is amazing. And another thing that I realized is, and it's hard to say, but it's true. No one's gonna save us but us. We have to put in the work, we have to. We can't wait for people to save us. We can't wait for international organizations to just show up and do it out of the good of their heart. We have to put in the work. What gives me hope is seeing what's been done and what can be done. Seeing those people in Sudan, right? Unfortunately, we don't talk about them enough. I don't think we talk about them enough. The people in Sudan are so thirsty for productivity. They are so hungry for achievements. All you gotta do is give them the support, whether financially or at least logistically, right? Like I remember the current board member and the president of SAPA, Yasser, when he went to one of the hospitals in Sudan and he asked the head of the OBGYN department, I can't remember her name, but she's an amazing person. She chose to stay when there were other opportunities to leave and make money outside of Sudan, right? And he asked her, what do you need? How can I help? We have to raise that question over and over again. Go talk to people in Sudan. What do you need? How can I help, right? And that's also rooted in our religion. Like you have to help your brother out if they ask you for help. I think there's a lot of hope. I think, like you said, a good amount of delusion is really necessary. And most successful people, I think, enjoy a little bit of delusion that's productive. So it's all impossible until it's actually done. We just have to keep going, and our community needs to support us.
I love the theme of delusion because I have a few friends that call me delusional Da'a. Because there's a lot of times like where you're always thinking of how can we continue to do this? And I think when I really became very hopeful, especially speaking from the corporate side, was in September. I think to the point that you brought up, Sina, when a lot of organizations are pledging and whatnot. And I remember going to one organization who pledged $300 million to support on the ground in Sudan. And I'm like, but how are you going to do that without working with organizations on the ground? And they're like, okay, can you bring us the organizations? And we'll see how we can do that. So in September, we hosted like a small panel discussion where we brought 3 organizations, trusted organization, SDN was one of them, and 40 funders, just so they can hear from them and hear from what's going on the ground. It was honestly just meant to be a conversation for them to kind of just get more awareness of the organizations and the great work that others are doing. And by the end of that conversation, from the 40, 3 of them pledged to contribute directly to these organizations. And from that, and this was really small, it was in New York, that kind of created that ripple effect. Now we have offices in Kenya who are calling the doc, can you bring us organizations in Kenya, create the same event, Uganda and whatnot. And I think that really gave me hope that organizations and international organizations are now really opening their eyes and seeing the success and seeing the mobilization that all of you guys are doing. So it's really important, and I think I'm very kind of grateful, and I appreciate all the work that you guys are all doing. And yeah, may we continue to collaborate. Bibo and mentioned that, collaboration is how, they brought them to where they are now. And if we continue to collaborate, there's no room for competition. Continue to collaborate and continue to work together, I think we'll be farther than where we were last week or the week before, so yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I echo everything Mumin, Sana, and Dua said, and I think what gives me hope is literally this room, like us just being here, connecting, sharing ideas, sharing knowledge, sharing insights, and being able to come together as a community and strengthen that bond that we have. I feel like no matter, we're all in different spaces, But no matter what we do, we have ideas and we have experience and exposure that we can translate into impact and supporting Sudan. Even the homies Bibo and Ayman talking about, you know, incorporating Sudan into their content. Even that is impactful, you know, because it's shedding light on Sudanese culture and its beauty and everything that we are as Sudanese people. So I feel like, and with, you know, everything going on in Sudan and seeing how it drags on, and I forgot who said, Moomin, no, we can't wait, or Sanat, we can't wait on anybody to help us. We have to take initiative, but seeing how it's dragging on and, you know, it can get fatiguing after a while, you know, years of the same thing, and the need is so great, but at the same time, we can't become fatigued. I think we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility because we were born into, a lot of us were born into a position where we're fortunate enough to be, you know, in places where we can find opportunities, where we can, you know, gain the knowledge and the resources and that we need for our development. But I think the more we come together like this, the more that we can come up, you know, put those fortunes together in helping Sudan, and, you know, towards the effort of helping Sudan. So I feel like we can't be fatigued. We have a responsibility, and we gotta really see that within ourselves. When we look ourselves in the mirror, that we do have a responsibility to help Sudan at the end of the day, and there's so many ways to do that. So yeah.
Guys, unfortunately, mashallah, it was a healthy and you know, long dialogue here. Like, we don't have time for a Q&A among ourselves, so we're going to have to just continue that. We're going to go on a 45-minute lunch here. Please help yourself to some lunch, and then just keep in mind too, we don't have the full house where we have to win this among ourselves, either in this room or outside. Enjoy the nice weather, enjoy the nice air, and please continue discussion among yourselves. Thanks.
Huge shout out to our panelists, guys. They are doing incredible work. It's difficult work. It's often thankless and without recognition, but we're going to recognize them today. I'm deeply humbled, and I have a lot of respect for these folks. And if anybody has any burning